Hey guys, it's Nicole. Welcome to my November wrap up. I read some really great books in November, especially fantasy books, and I am going to start off by talking about A Master of Djinn. I did quickly mention this in my October wrap up last month because I did start this in October and I finished it in November. So this book is set in Cairo in 1912. It is set in our world, but it's like an alternate history where there was a veil that was broken down between the mundanes, our world essentially, and the magical supernatural realm. And in this world there are all these like supernatural creatures such as Djinn living amongst the humans. We follow our main character Fatma, who we are introduced to in one of the prequel novellas of the series, which is A Dead Djinn in Cairo, and she is an investigator of sorts. She works for a government agency that specializes in the supernatural, and then she is tasked with solving and helping like crimes that are involved with the supernatural. I love her character. I loved how female-centric this story was. There was just so many good female characters. They were so well written. Like, I'm just so impressed because P. Delicark is a male, and usually male fantasy authors cannot write women. But like, hats off to him because he can do it. I really enjoyed the world. Not only is it like this interesting blend of it being historically in our world, also having magic, but there's also like steampunk elements throughout this as well. It was such an interesting world building that was just amazing, and I loved it being set in Cairo. At the very beginning of this book there is basically like a cult murder that occurs, and all these people in this sort of brotherhood society are murdered mysteriously, and then there are other murders sort of taking place in other sort of mysterious events that are all like not obviously linked, but it is revealed that they are linked. And Fatma is tasked with like trying to solve what the hell is going on. She's just been assigned a new partner. Up until now she's always worked alone. She loves working alone, so she's not keen to have this new partner. I really loved her partner's character. It's another female character, and I just thought they worked really well together in the end. Their personalities complemented one another and their skills, and I loved this. I gave it 4 stars. I don't know why it wasn't a 5. Like, I don't have any criticisms. I don't have anything I wanted to be done differently, but it's just one of those books that was just a 4, not a 5, and I don't know why, and it kind of irks me that I don't know why, but I'm nonetheless very excited to continue on with this series when the sequel eventually comes out, and to also read more by this author in the meantime because I love his stuff, really love his stuff. I also read another Keigo Higashino book in November. I listened to the audiobook of Malice. I have been kind of on a journey with this author the last few months. I've really loved his stuff. He is a Japanese author and all his books are translated, and he does focus on like crime fiction. He does have other stories, but most of his books, or at least the ones that are translated, are crime fiction, and the ones that I've read of his. This one is a separate book that is part of a different detective series of his that I have read. In this we have a sort of diary entry or journal entry of a person who is a suspect of a murder, and then we also follow the POV of the detective, and the whole thing is like eventually pieced together. The murder that takes place is of this author, this famous author, and he dies in his home, and I feel like that's all I can say. Really, I did enjoy this. I think this might be my least favorite of his so far. I don't know. His books are very clever. Like, I do find his mysteries very clever and very well set up. But for me, towards the end, this got a little bit too complicated and a little bit too much. But something I do really like and appreciate that Keigo Higashino does is he has this focus on explaining and also just crafting the intent of the murderers, and it's always very interesting, the intent. It's not just a simple like this guy got angry at this guy and he killed him. It's just very interesting, and I just love that. It's a little bit far-fetched sometimes and can be a little bit unrealistic, but I just really like it and I really appreciate it because I think it does a lot to his characters in his story, and he is able to flesh it out throughout the entire novel. And yeah, so I gave this 3.5. Definitely am going to read more by him. Literally going to read everything that I can possibly read by him because unfortunately not all his books are published, so I can't read everything, though I would like to try. Okay, I also read my next Robin Hobb book, which is Dragon Haven. This is book 2 in the Rainwild Quartet, so I now have 2 more books remaining in the series to read. I am still like a bit confused about this series. Not confused in the sense that I don't know what's going on, but confused in terms of how I am feeling towards this series. The thing is, okay, it's gotten to this point with me where Robin Hobb is a comfort author for me. I know what to expect in terms of her writing. I love her writing. I know what to expect in terms of her like character development, and I still like really appreciate her character development. Like, she still had some good character development in this book, although there has been better. But I do find her stories just comforting. So it's really hard to rate this when this might not be a favourite, but I still give it 3 stars. Like, but that might feel a bit generous. I don't know. Something I will say that I haven't really explained about this book, because I feel like I can't say a whole lot in terms of plot or anything, because this is part of a very like expansive world and series. But basically what's happening in this series from book 1 are all these characters are on an expedition and they're traveling. This series has a lot to do with following those who are outcasted, and something I should give a trigger warning for is there is a lot of discussion and a lot of inclusion of children who have been born with like deformities. That's the only way I can describe it, them being slightly deformed, but it's not something that happens in our world, because the way it is written in here, it is something that is connected with the magic of the world. And these children have been outcasted. Usually when they are born, it is obvious from birth the condition these children are born in. These children are usually left for deaf, but these ones in here who are now grown up, they're like teenagers. I think at the beginning of book 1 they were raised by their families where really they shouldn't have, but they're also gonna live a life with like not having full health and dying early and maybe having some sort of chronic illness. For the most part, I did really like that inclusion. I think it's really important to include like illnesses, particularly chronic ones or chronic conditions, because that's something you don't always see in fantasy. So I definitely did appreciate that. I do want to give a trigger warning because I think it could be like offensive to some people, some of the views, not all of them. So we're following these characters as well as some other characters who are all on this expedition. I did like how it kind of talked about how society mistreats these people who are born differently and how they outcast them and how they don't help them when they need help. I swear my wrap-up's a curse because my battery just died and I had to change it. So hopefully this angle's not too different to the one I had before.
Oh my god, this angle is awful. I'm so sorry.
But the same thing happened in my last wrap-up, but this time I've got a spare battery so I don't have to wait hours for the battery to charge. Anyway, as I was saying, another really strong theme is people being confined to a certain life they don't want to live. So for example, one of the main characters is sort of confined in a marriage, like she's just expected to have this marriage and to be the wife and to fulfill those duties of a wife and to not have her own purpose in life outside of that. And I did really appreciate those like themes in the discussion of this, but I still just cannot get over the fact that Robin Hobb wrote this. It's still very much Bridgerton and Dragon vibes. I gave this book 3 stars, and I do plan to continue the last 2 books in the series in December. So hopefully I can talk about them in my December wrap up. Next, I listened to the audiobook of Kingdom of Flesh and Fire. This is the sequel to From Blood and Ash. I gave this book 2 stars. This book is just ridiculous. Like, this series is just ridiculous. I did quite enjoy like book 1. Like, I had just a fun time, but I just can't get over how ridiculous this is. If you haven't heard of the setup of book 1, we basically follow this maiden called Poppy, and she is someone who's kept like a secret. She's veiled up, she's completely covered up, she's kept very isolated, and it's all for the purpose of the ruling class. And it's very mysterious. Poppy doesn't really know much about what's going on in the world. You don't know what's going on in the world at first, and she ends up like sneaking out one night to this tavern of sorts we'll call it, and she meets a man called Hawk, and Hawk ends up becoming her bodyguard, and then they kind of get into like a romance, and things just kind of go from there. You are kept in the dark for a lot of book 1, so there's only so little I can say plot wise here, but it is essentially the romance of like Poppy and Hawk throughout the series, uncovering like all the secrets to do with both of them, and sort of Poppy's situation in the world. Poppy is, I'm gonna say it, she's a pathetic character. Like, she's a very inconsistent character in her, like, the way she's written. I mean, the writing in this is really not the greatest overall, but her character is very inconsistent. Like, I found at times like arguments a little bit silly. There was a lot of repetitiveness going on in terms of what one character was saying to one another had to be repeated to another character. So long-winded to an unnecessary degree. Like, an editor was needed badly, but like, I'm not gonna lie, I had a fun time. Like, I was entertained for the most part while listening to it. I will say though, I do think if I read this physically, I would have struggled. I would have really struggled. The fact that I was listening to an audiobook of this, I was able to get through the story quite pleasantly, which I don't think would have been the case if I read it physically. I mean, I don't want to compare this to Sarah J Maas, but it is very similar in a lot of ways to Sarah J Maas, and I just can't help but look at this and see the influences that Sarah J Maas's influence. Like, there's heartmates in this. Heartmates. And if you know Sarah J Maas, mates is a big thing in her fairy books. So it's like very obvious, the influence, which is a good or bad thing. I don't know. Take it or leave it. Like, maybe if you're a fan of Sarah J Maas, you might like it. It might be a good indication you'll love this book too. And yeah, that's all I'll say on it. I also reread for the first time in years and years Graceling. This was like my favorite book when I was about 16, 17. I really enjoyed this, and I gave it 4 stars this time, not 5 like I used to rate it. This world is set where there are these graces, and graces are essentially people that have magical abilities, and they are identified because they have 2 different colored eyes. So usually what happens is when these graces are babies, their eyes will change color, and that will identify them as graced, but it won't identify their power. Their power could be anything from having a skilled cooking ability to being able to read minds, or to know what the weather forecast is going to be. It could be anything, but it's something that they don't know at first, and it can take time to discover. So when these graces are babies, they ascend to the palace, to whoever rules their kingdom, and they are raised in the palace. And when their grace is revealed, if it is useful, that child will remain in the palace and serve the king or queen or whoever rules in their kingdom. And if it's not useful, they're sent back home, which isn't always a good thing, because their graces, particularly in the part of the world where our main character is, they're very feared, and they're sort of seen as a curse. And if a child grace who's been raised in the palace has the unuseful grace and is sent back home to her family who might own some sort of shop, then no one will want to go and visit that shop or purchase from there, because they believe it's cursed and they want to avoid the Graceling that lives there. We follow our main character Katsa, who is actually the niece to a king, and her grace is the grace of killing. So she is very, very useful, and she is used by her uncle as an assassin. That is a very small part of the novel. It's really the start that's focused on. I've realized I have this very sort of basic taste in fantasy, where I love having an introduction to like a court set up full of like politics and just very interesting like alliances, and then having a second half of the story where there's more of an adventure element and more like traveling going on and sort of, I guess, fulfilling some sort of quest. And this book, it has that setup, that sort of basic setup. Like some of my favorite books like Assassin's Apprentice has that, The Girl with Fire of Thorns sort of has that, and yeah, it's in here again. So it's just very interesting that like some of my favorite books just have the exact same setup. I think I'm a sucker for that kind of classic fantasy story setup. I had a really pleasant time reading this again. I will say one thing I was obsessed about this when I was younger was the romance, and reading it now as an adult, I actually thought it happened too randomly, like not too quickly, just too randomly. And I really liked these two characters as friends at first, and I kind of wish they just stayed as friends. I think they made a better pair as friends than a romantic couple. I also really loved how this had sort of a message of, you know, power doesn't define you, it's how you use power that defines you, which is quite a basic message that can be like delivered in so many other books. But I liked how it was done in here and how it explored Katz's character through that, because she does have a very powerful grace, yet she allows others to like use her for it, and it's never like for her own gain. So I really liked what that said about her character and how her character like explored that throughout the story. And yeah, I really enjoyed this. I have started rereading Fire, which is book 2 in this series. I'm hoping to finish that in December. So far that reread is going well as well, and there's a lot I forgot about that book, and there was a lot I forgot about this book as well, which always makes for a fun time. I also listened to the audiobook of One of Us is Lying, and I picked this up because I did start the TV show, which I have now finished, and I just watched episode 1 and I was like, hang on, I kind of like this TV show, I want to try the audiobook of this before I watch the whole thing. I didn't end up loving the book though. I actually think I prefer the TV show. I gave the book 2 stars. Basically the premise of this is it's a YA thriller mystery. The murder happens, or the killing happens, in a detention, and we have 5 kids who are in detention, and one of them dies because he has a severe allergy to peanuts, and he drinks water that has peanut oil in it. And then the remaining 4 students who are in detention with him are then the murder suspects, and we follow each of these 4 characters. First of all, I'm not the biggest fan of multiple POV stories, but I'm especially not a fan of multiple POV stories that are in first person, and unfortunately this book was that. So right off the bat, like, this book didn't have the greatest chance of becoming a favorite or anything because I was not a fan of the narration style. But what I will say is this just was not a thrilling story at all. Like, I wasn't scared. I thought the mystery was interesting, and sort of the way it all ended up happening was sort of interesting, but I also kind of found it a little bit problematic. I don't want to get too much into why this book was problematic because unfortunately it does contain spoilers, but I was looking on Goodreads and a lot of people did have similar feelings to me. So if you're curious, I recommend look at Goodreads reviews because people do mention in detail what actually happens. I didn't think the different POVs had distinct voices from one another. I thought these characters were much more interested in having a romantic relationship with one another than like the actual murder case that they were involved in, which was just like ridiculous. Something I forgot to add, the reason why these 4 are suspects for murder isn't just because they were in the room the time the death occurred, but also because the boy who was murdered ran this like blog site where he would share students' secrets, like things that they didn't want to be revealed, things like cheating, like whether that was with a boyfriend or with test results, things that they had done that, you know, people just didn't want to be common knowledge. And these 4 students who were in detention each had a secret that would have ruined their reputation. So that's why they were murder suspects. I also just didn't like how each of these 4 characters were stereotypes. We had like the blonde popular girl, we had the nerdy girl, we had the jock, and we had the bad boy. And they were just all walking stereotypes of their stereotypes, and there was just nothing interesting about them. And that was my overall issue with this book. I also completed the audiobook of Riven the Four by Brandon Sanderson, which is the 4th book in the Stormlight series. I can't say too much because it's book 4, but I gave this book 2 stars. I originally loved this series when I first started it. Like, I loved book 1, I loved book 2, and I've definitely become very detached from the series. I think it's for a combination of reasons. My taste has probably changed slightly, to be honest, but I think the multiple POVs and having characters I favour has something to do with it as well. I feel like the stories sort of run out. Like, I just feel like the actual character's story have you know, ended a while ago. The stories got very repetitive in this book, and there was nothing new really happening with the characters personally. However, I did still really appreciate like the world and how the plot and the magic and the world were all moving. I thought that was all very interesting. I was really happy by how much Kaladin we got in this book, because he's my favourite character, and how little of Delana we got in this book, because Delana is my least favourite. I still am not a fan of him, but I just don't care about this series anymore. I've just gotten to that stage, which is really sad, because there are some really cool things happening. Like, Brandon Sanderson connects this series quite a bit in this book to his other books from other series, because he's made up this like whole world, like the Cosmere. So that was really fun, because we have cameos from characters from other books of his that aren't in the Stormlight series. But I'm just not excited about it anymore, and I'm really sad about it. So I think I will read the next book, because it will be the last one in this like era of books. He's going to make this series like very, very long, and there's going to be like, I think like 5 books each era. So I do want to see how he like concludes it, but I'm just sad. That's all there is to it, really. I did read that book for my TBR completion project vlog video, so if you want to hear thoughts as I was like reading that book, I will have that vlog linked so you can hear my in-depth thoughts. And in that vlog I also completed The Burning God, which thankfully I loved. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars. I adored it. I adore the series. It's one of my favorite series of all time. It's incredible. From book 1 we are following Rin, and in here she's like in war. Like, war's been happening for a little while. She's still dealing with like trauma of what she's been through, but she has to still like fight. It was amazing. It was amazing. I really love this book. I really loved Rin. I really love the other characters. My only complaint I had was there were some characters that did like disappear from the story for a little while that I loved, and I wish they didn't, because I just wanted them to be present because of how much I loved them. I loved how this like showed how unhinged Rin really is, and there's nothing she wouldn't do to win. But I really appreciated how this book sort of looked at parts of war that I think are often skipped over in fantasy. Like, there was a lot in here of like an army traveling from one destination to another, and the sort of struggles that come along with that traveling, in terms of food, running out of food, and then army members dying off, sort of the strain on war, how that affects not only the leaders of the army but also the members of the army and their mental health. It was great. It was amazing. Read this series, please. While I was suffering with this book, I decided to listen to the audiobook of The Score, which is not my usual cup of tea.
My friends' reactions when they saw I read this book. LMAFO.
I didn't give this book a rating because it's not my usual cup of tea. I just kind of wanted to read it for funsies, for funsies really. This is an adult like romance, or I guess it's called like new adult romance is the technical term. At the start of this book we follow this girl who ends up breaking up with her boyfriend, and she's been with for a very long time, and she's usually a very like committed person, doesn't really have much to do with boys outside of relationships that she's had. She ends up having a one-night stand with this guy who is known to be a bit of a player, and it's basically just about them. Yeah, it was a fun time. I don't really have much to say about this because like I just wanted to like listen to an audiobook that I didn't have to think about too much, didn't have to critique, didn't want to have to rate, because so often like when I read these days, especially if it's for like a video or something, I'm thinking of all the ways I should like try and talk about this book like intelligently so I can express my thoughts, and I just wanted to just kind of embrace a book and just like go along for a fun silly time or ride, and that's what this book was. And yeah, that's kind of all, like, I don't really have any thoughts on it. It's just something I read now. It was interesting to read because I know how popular this author in this series is, and this is book 3 in the series, but you can read them like whatever order you want. And basically all the guys and girls like go to the same school, so you definitely have like cameos of other characters and other couples, so you will know like who ends up with who. But I feel like that's obvious from the get-go with romance. But anyway, like as a drama, like you know they're gonna get together. It's the point of the story. And yeah, those are all the books I managed to complete in November. And I'm having an even better reading month this December already, even though it's still early days. So hopefully that continues and my December wrap up will be even better. So that's all I have to say today. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you're enjoying whatever you're currently reading, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!